The blood-soaked telegram trembled in Lillian Abbott's hands as she collapsed to her knees in the dusty yard of her isolated homestead, tears blurring the words that had forever changed her life. It was 1878 in Wyoming Territory, and the merciless frontier had claimed yet another victim, her father, the only family she had left in this world, gunned down over a gambling debt he'd never mentioned to his only daughter. Lillian's auburn hair whipped around her face as the autumn wind picked up, seeming to mock her anguish with its careless freedom. At 22, she was now completely alone on this hardscrabble patch of earth, 15 miles outside of Evanston. The homestead her father had staked 3 years prior was now hers along with all its burdens. As the initial shock subsided, reality crashed upon her like a summer thunderstorm. The garden had yielded poorly this season. The cow was dry. The pantry held barely enough to last a week. And the small pouch of coins her father had left behind wouldn't cover half of what she needed. "Damn you, Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking as she clutched the telegram to her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" The house behind her, little more than a 2-room cabin with a lean-to kitchen, had never felt so empty. She'd need supplies from town, and soon. But how could she face those people? Everyone in Evanston would know by now that Thomas Abbott had died like a fool, shot by a card shark over money he didn't have. The shame of it burned hotter than fever in her chest. She couldn't bear the thought of their pitying looks, the whispers behind hands, the sudden silence when she walked into the general store. Not now, not yet. As darkness fell, Lillian sat at the rough-hewn table, calculating what she needed most desperately: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for the rifle, lamp oil, medicine for the headaches that plagued her, and a dozen other necessities. She scratched the list with a stub of pencil, tears occasionally blotting the paper. "Miss Abbott, hello." The masculine voice calling from outside startled her so badly she knocked over the oil lamp. Thankfully, she caught it before it shattered. "Who's there?" she called, reaching for her father's shotgun propped beside the door. "Samuel Quinn, madam. I work for Mr. Holbrook at the Mercantile." Cautiously, Lillian cracked open the door. In the dim light from her lamp, she could make out a tall figure astride a roan gelding, his hat pulled low against the evening chill. "What brings you all the way out here, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, keeping the shotgun visible. "News travels fast in Evanston," he said, dismounting with easy grace. "Mr. Holbrook heard about your father. Sent me to see if you needed anything." Now that he stood closer, Lillian could see him more clearly. Samuel Quinn was perhaps 27, with shoulders broadened by hard work and sun-darkened skin that spoke of long days in the saddle. His eyes, shadowed by his hat brim, seemed kind, but Lillian had learned not to trust kind eyes. "I'm managing fine," she lied, her knuckles white around the shotgun. Samuel glanced at the weapon and then back at her face. "No disrespect intended, Miss Abbott, but that's not what I've heard. You're 15 miles from town with winter coming on. Your pa's gone, and word is you're alone out here." Indignation flared. "And what business is that of yours or anyone else in town?" "None," he admitted, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. "But Mr. Holbrook's a decent man. He thought you might need supplies, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" "But might not feel up to coming to town just yet." The simple understanding in those words nearly broke her composure. He knew. Everyone knew she was too ashamed to show her face. "I don't need charity," she said stiffly. "It's not charity to help a neighbor," Samuel replied. "I've got paper and pencil. You tell me what you need and I'll bring it out tomorrow. You can settle with Mr. Holbrook when you're ready." The offer was tempting, almost too tempting. Lillian hesitated, pride warring with necessity. "Why would you do this?" Samuel looked away, out toward the darkening plains. "Your pa helped me once when I first came to Wyoming. I was green as spring grass, lost my horse in a flash flood. He found me half dead from exposure, brought me to his camp, shared his food." He met her eyes. I never forgot that kindness. Something in his steady gaze convinced her he was telling the truth. Slowly, Lillian lowered the shotgun. "I have a list started," she said, "if you truly don't mind." "I don't mind, Miss Abbott," he said, and for the first time since the telegram arrived, Lillian felt a tiny spark of hope. The next afternoon, Lillian was mending a tear in her only good dress when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the autumn sun, and saw Samuel Quinn returning as promised. Behind him, a pack mule was laden with supplies. "You came back," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Samuel's mouth quirked. "I said I would." He dismounted and began unpacking the mule, bringing sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, cans of peaches and beans, lamp oil, ammunition, and even the headache powders she'd requested. There were items she hadn't asked for, as well as a small sack of hard candies, a book of poetry, a length of pretty blue ribbon. "I didn't request these," she said, fingering the ribbon. "Mr. Holbrook's wife insisted," Samuel explained, his cheeks coloring slightly. "Said every lady needs something pretty now and then." The kindness of it, this small, unnecessary beauty, made her throat tighten painfully. "Please thank her for me," she managed. As Samuel continued unloading, Lillian noticed fresh bruises on his knuckles and a cut at the corner of his mouth. "You've been hurt," she said. He shrugged. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." "What happened?" Samuel hesitated, then sighed. "Fellow in town was running his mouth about your father, said some things no decent man would repeat in front of a lady. I suggested he might want to reconsider his words." "You fought because of gossip about my father?" Lillian asked, incredulous. "I fought because a man shouldn't speak ill of the dead, especially when the dead can't defend themselves." He met her gaze directly. "And because his daughter shouldn't have to bear hearing such talk." Something warm unfurled in Lillian's chest. Gratitude, yes, but also a flicker of something else she wasn't ready to name. "That was foolish," she said, but there was no heat in her words. "Probably," he agreed with a half-smile that transformed his solemn face. As they carried the supplies inside, Lillian found herself studying Samuel Quinn more closely. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, but there was a gentleness to him, to the way he handled the delicate items with care, how he spoke softly as if afraid his deep voice might startle her. "I can't pay for all this just yet," she said as they finished. "The bank in Evanston holds what little money Papa had, and I haven't been able to—" "Mr. Holbrook said there's no rush," Samuel interrupted. "He knows you're good for it." Lillian's pride bristled. "I don't want special treatment." "It's not special. It's the same credit he extends to any reliable customer." Samuel replaced his hat. "I should be heading back before dark." Impulsively, Lillian touched his arm. "Wait. At least let me offer you coffee before you ride all that way." Samuel's eyes widened slightly at the contact, but he nodded. "That's kind of you, Miss Abbott." As she busied herself with the stove, Lillian felt a strange nervousness. It had been months since anyone but her father had sat at this table. The cabin suddenly seemed shabbier than she'd realized. The floor needed sweeping, the curtains were faded, and the chairs mismatched. "It's not much," she apologized as she poured the coffee into her father's chipped cups. "It's a sight better than what I've got at my place," Samuel said, accepting the cup gratefully. "I'm not much for homemaking." "You have your own homestead," small one, about 5 miles east of town. "Nothing fancy, just enough land to raise a few horses." I break and train them, sell them when they're ready. The job at the mercantile supplements when horse trading is slow." Lillian found herself genuinely interested. "You must be good with animals." "Better with them than people most days," he admitted. "Horses don't lie or play games. They're honest creatures." "Unlike my father," Lillian said before she could stop herself. Samuel's expression softened. "I didn't mean that, but it's true. He lied to me. All these years I thought we were making a decent living. I never knew he gambled away what little we had." Her voice caught. "I never knew he borrowed money from men who'd kill him over a debt." "Your father was a good man who made bad choices," Samuel said quietly. "Most of us are guilty of the same in one way or another." "What bad choices have you made, Mr. Quinn?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. He studied his coffee as if the answers might be found in its depths. "More than I can count. Trusted the wrong people. Lost my temper when I should have walked away. Held grudges I should have released." He looked up. "We're all just doing our best to survive out here, Miss Abbott." There was something about his honesty that soothed her raw edges. For the first time since receiving the telegram, Lillian felt the knot of shame in her chest loosen slightly. "Please," she said, "call me Lillian." "Lillian," he repeated, and the way he said her name softly, like it was something precious, made her heart beat a little faster. "Then I'm Samuel to you, not Mr. Quinn." They talked until the coffee was gone and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. Lillian learned that Samuel had come west from Pennsylvania 5 years earlier, that he'd lost his parents to influenza when he was 16, that he could play the harmonica but couldn't carry a tune to save his life. He made her laugh with stories of the eccentric customers at Holbrook's Mercantile, and for a little while she forgot to be sad. When he finally rose to leave, Lillian felt an unexpected reluctance to see him go. "I'll be back in 2 weeks with more supplies," he promised. "Sooner if you need anything urgent." "I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Besides, it's the best coffee I've had in months." After he'd gone, the cabin seemed emptier than before. Lillian moved about her evening chores, finding herself glancing out the window toward the east, where Samuel's homestead lay 5 miles beyond town. She told herself it was merely gratitude. She felt gratitude for his kindness, for the supplies, for treating her like a neighbor rather than an object of pity. But as she tied her hair that night with the blue ribbon Mrs. Holbrook had sent, Lillian Abbott admitted to herself that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to something more than just surviving until the next day. True to his word, Samuel returned 2 weeks later. This time, he brought not only supplies but also news of town, letters that had arrived for her at the post office and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Lillian asked, turning it over in her hands. "Open it and see," Samuel replied, his usual solemnity giving way to something almost playful. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, its pages creamy and blank, waiting to be filled. "I noticed you writing your thoughts on scraps of paper," he explained. "Thought you might like something proper to keep them in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Lillian deeply. No one had given her a present in years, not since her mother had died when Lillian was 15. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the cover. "Thank you, Samuel." His smile warmed his entire face. "You're welcome, Lillian." As autumn deepened toward winter, Samuel's visits became a lifeline Lillian hadn't known she needed. He came every 2 weeks without fail, bringing supplies, news, occasionally a book or newspaper. Sometimes he stayed only long enough to unload the pack mule. Other times, when weather permitted and daylight was plentiful, he'd linger over coffee, telling her about the horses he was training or listening to her talk about the books she'd read. On his 4th visit, He arrived looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Lillian asked immediately. Samuel hesitated. "There's talk in town about you living out here alone." Lillian stiffened. "What sort of talk?" "The usual small-minded nonsense, that it isn't proper, that a young woman needs protection." He shifted uncomfortably. "Some are saying I'm taking advantage by visiting so often." Heat rushed to Lillian's face. "That's ridiculous. You've been nothing but a gentleman." "I know that, you know that, but people love to gossip." Samuel looked genuinely concerned. "I don't want my visits to harm your reputation." "My reputation?" Lillian laughed bitterly. "The daughter of a man killed over gambling debts. I think that ship has sailed, Samuel." "Don't say that," he said sharply. "You're a respectable woman, Lillian. You deserve to be treated as such." His indignation on her behalf touched something deep inside her. "What do you suggest?" "That you stop coming. I need these supplies and I'm still not ready to." She couldn't finish the sentence. "To face town," Samuel completed gently. "I understand, and no, I'm not suggesting I stop coming. But I thought perhaps we could have a chaperone of sorts." "A chaperone out here?" "Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house has a niece, Sarah, who's 14. Smart girl, good with horses. I thought she might ride out with me sometimes. It would give her a chance to earn a little money, and it would quiet the gossips." Lillian considered the idea. Having another female around, even a young one, would indeed be proper. And truthfully, she was growing lonely for female companionship. "If Sarah would like to come, I'd welcome her," Lillian said. "But Samuel, thank you for caring about such things. Not many men would." "Not many men know what it's like to be judged unfairly," he said quietly. "I do." There was a story there, Lillian sensed, but Samuel changed the subject and she didn't press. There would be time for stories. For now, it was enough to know he would continue to come, that this fragile connection wouldn't be severed by town gossip. Sarah Wilson proved to be a delightful addition to Samuel's visits. A cheerful girl with freckles and practical sensibilities, she brought a youthful energy to the homestead that Lillian hadn't realized she'd been missing. On days when Samuel had to return to town quickly, Sarah often stayed behind, helping Lillian with chores or simply keeping her company. "Mr. Quinn talks about you all the time," Sarah confided one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together. Lillian nearly dropped the bowl. "He does." Hum. At the mercantile, when customers ask who he's loading supplies for, he always says, "Miss Abbott out on the Western claim," real dignified like. And then Mrs. Holbrook gives him this look. Sarah giggled. "You know, like she knows something he doesn't want her to know." "And what would that be?" Lillian asked, trying to sound unconcerned. Sarah rolled her eyes like only a teenager could. "That he's sweet on you, of course. Anyone with eyes can see it. The way he makes sure everything on your list is perfect, how he always finds some little extra to bring you. Last week he spent nearly an hour picking out which ribbons to bring." Lillian's cheeks flushed hot. "That's just kindness, Sarah. Mr. Quinn is a kind man." "Oh, he's kind all right, but he doesn't spend hours choosing ribbons for Mrs. Barnett or Widow Green when he delivers their orders." Sarah shaped her dough with knowing satisfaction. "And he doesn't smile like that when he talks about them either." Later, alone in her bed, Lillian turned Sarah's words over in her mind. Was it possible? Did Samuel see her as more than a neighbor in need, more than an obligation to a man who had once helped him? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She hadn't considered romance since John Willett had courted her briefly in Cheyenne, before her father moved them to this homestead. That courtship had withered quickly when John realized Thomas Abbott had more debts than assets. The experience had left Lillian wary, convinced that practical considerations would always outweigh matters of the heart on the frontier. But Samuel was different. He'd seen her at her lowest grieving, ashamed, isolated, and still he came back, fortnight after fortnight, bearing not just necessities but small comforts, tokens of thoughtfulness that spoke of something deeper than duty. Snow came early that year, blanketing the plains in white silence by mid-November. Samuel arrived alone, Sarah having fallen ill with a minor cold. "I shouldn't stay," he said, stomping snow from his boots on the porch. "Without Sarah here—" "Nonsense," Lillian interrupted. "You've ridden through a snowstorm to bring me supplies. The least I can do is offer you hot coffee and a meal before you ride back." The relief on his face told her he'd been hoping for exactly this invitation. Inside, the cabin was warm from the cook stove, and Samuel sighed appreciatively as he removed his coat and gloves. "Something smells wonderful," he said. "Rabbit stew. I snared a fat one yesterday near the creek." Lillian stirred the pot, oddly nervous. It was the first time since Sarah had begun accompanying him that they were alone together. "It's not much, but it's hot. It smells like heaven to me." They ate at the small table, knees occasionally brushing in the confined space, each touch sending an inexplicable warmth through Lillian's body. Outside, the snow fell harder, the wind rattling the windows. "This storm's getting worse," Lillian observed as she poured Samuel a second cup of coffee. "Perhaps you should wait until it eases before heading back." Samuel glanced out the window, then at her face. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition to keep you from freezing to death in a blizzard," she said firmly. "My father would never forgive me if I sent you out in this." The mention of her father sobered them both. It had been nearly 2 months since his death, and though the raw wound of grief had begun to heal, the scar remained tender. "You still miss him terribly?" Samuel asked quietly. Lillian considered the question. "Yes," she finally said, "but it's complicated. I miss the father I thought I had, the one who was honest and hardworking. I'm still angry at the man who lied and gambled and put us both at risk." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Is that terrible of me?" "No," Samuel said without hesitation. "It's human. We can love people and still be angry at the harm they've caused. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You sound like you speak from experience." Samuel stared into his coffee cup. "My father drank. Not all the time, but when he did, he became someone else, someone cruel." He touched his left shoulder unconsciously. "He broke my collarbone when I was 12, throwing me against a wall. My mother finally left him after that, took me with her. But a part of me still loved the father who taught me to fish and told the best stories and could whittle anything from a piece of pine." Lillian reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm sorry, Samuel." He turned his palm upward, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "We survive. We keep going. We find new people to trust, to care for." His eyes met hers, and the air between them seemed to thicken. Lillian became acutely aware of their joined hands, of his thumb gently stroking her skin, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might lean forward, might close the distance between them. But instead, Samuel gently released her hand and stood. "I should check on the horses," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Make sure they're sheltered from the worst of the wind." When he returned, snow dusting his dark hair and shoulders, there was a careful distance in his manner. They passed the rest of the evening in conversation that never ventured beyond safe topics: the weather, the horses, news from town. But Lillian felt the undercurrents, the unspoken words hovering between them like the snowflakes swirling outside her window. The storm showed no signs of abating as night fell. Lillian made a pallet for Samuel near the stove, using spare blankets and her father's old buffalo robe. "I'll sleep in the lean-to kitchen," she told him. "It's snug enough with the cook stove." "I can't take your bed, Lillian," he protested. "It's not my bed you're taking." That's in the other room. She nodded toward the small bedroom off the main living area. This is just a temporary arrangement until the storm passes. Reluctantly, Samuel accepted the arrangement. As Lillian prepared for bed in the lean-to, she heard him moving about the main room, the creak of floorboards, the soft thud of boots being removed. The domesticity of these sounds stirred something in her, a longing for something she'd never dared to want before. She slept fitfully, waking often to the howl of wind and the creaking of the cabin's timbers. Near dawn, she gave up on sleep entirely and slipped quietly into the main room to stoke the fire. Samuel was already awake, sitting wrapped in a blanket near the stove, staring into the embers. He looked up as she entered, and the naked longing on his face before he could mask it stole Lillian's breath. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "Too many thoughts." "What sort of thoughts?" Samuel was silent for a long moment. "Dangerous ones," he finally said. "Thoughts about what I want but shouldn't ask for." Lillian's heart pounded against her ribs. She took a step closer, then another, until she stood before him. "What if," she said carefully, "what you want is something I might want to give?" Samuel looked up at her, his eyes dark and intense in the firelight. "Lillian," he breathed, half warning, half plea. She sank to her knees beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. "I'm tired of being afraid, Samuel. Afraid of town, of gossip, of what people think. Afraid of trusting, of wanting things." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough. Instead of answering with words, Lillian leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For one terrifying moment, Samuel remained still, and Lillian feared she'd misread everything. But then his arms came around her, pulling her closer as he returned the kiss with a fervor that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the second time I came here," he confessed. "When you were standing in the doorway with flour on your cheek and that blue ribbon in your hair." Lillian laughed softly. "I've wanted you to do it since you defended my father's name in town, even though you came back with bruised knuckles for your trouble." Samuel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "I don't want to rush this, Lillian. You're still grieving. And there's still talk in town. Let them talk," she said fiercely. "They'll talk regardless of what we do. I'm tired of living my life in fear of wagging tongues." "Even so," Samuel said, "I want to do this properly. Court you as you deserve to be courted." The sweetness of his words warmed her more than the fire. "I'd like that," she admitted. They spent the day in a bubble of newfound intimacy, talking more openly than before, exchanging small touches, his hand on her shoulder as she cooked, her fingers brushing his as she passed him a cup, stolen kisses when the urge became too strong to resist. By afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape and a crystalline blue sky. "I should head back," Samuel said reluctantly. "People will be worried." Lillian nodded, though part of her wished the blizzard had lasted another day, another night. "When will you return?" "As soon as I can," he promised. "Weather permitting, within the week." And Lillian. He took her hands in his. "I'd like to escort you to town when you're ready, not because you need protection, but because I'd be proud to walk beside you." The thought of facing Evanston still made Lillian's stomach clench with anxiety, but with Samuel beside her, perhaps it wouldn't be unbearable. "I'll think about it," she said. He kissed her once more before mounting his horse, a kiss that held promise and longing in equal measure. Lillian stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the rise, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where his had been. Back inside, she opened the journal Samuel had given her and began to write, not about grief or shame or isolation, but about hope, about the possibility of love in this harsh, beautiful land. For the first time since her father's death, Lillian Abbott looked toward the future with something like joy. True to his word, Samuel returned 5 days later, this time with both Sarah Wilson and a surprise visitor, Mrs. Holbrook from the Mercantile, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who embraced Lillian as if they were old friends. "I've been wanting to meet you properly for ages," Mrs. Holbrook declared. "Samuel speaks so highly of you. I just had to see for myself the young woman who's captured his attention so completely." Lillian blushed, glancing at Samuel, who looked both embarrassed and pleased by Mrs. Holbrook's bluntness. "Margaret," he muttered, "you promised to be subtle. Subtle. At my age, what would be the point?" Mrs. Holbrook patted Lillian's hand. "Now, my dear, I've brought some fabric for new curtains and a proper dress for when you decide to grace Evanston with your presence. No arguments, it's a gift." Lillian was overwhelmed by the woman's generosity and directness. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Holbrook. Say you'll call me Margaret and that you'll consider coming to our Christmas gathering in 3 weeks. Nothing fancy, just friends and good food." She glanced meaningfully at Samuel. "And certain people who would very much like to escort you." Despite her initial discomfort, Lillian found herself warming to Margaret Holbrook. The older woman had a way of making difficulties seem manageable, of treating painful subjects with matter-of-fact compassion that diffused their power to hurt. "Thomas Abbott was a flawed man," Margaret said as they shared tea while Samuel and Sarah tended the horses. "But he loved you fiercely, Lillian. Everyone in Evanston knew that. Whatever mistakes he made, that truth remains unchanged." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It's only the truth. And the truth is, most folks in town respect you for staying on, for not running back east with your tail between your legs like so many do when the frontier proves harder than their dreams." Margaret sipped her tea. "Oh, there are a few bitter old biddies who'll cluck their tongues no matter what you do, but they're not worth your worry." By the time Margaret and Sarah prepared to leave, Lillian had tentatively agreed to attend the Christmas gathering. Samuel lingered behind as the women mounted their horses. "You don't have to come if you're not ready," he said quietly. "Margaret means well, but she can be persuasive." Lillian smiled. "I like her, and yes, she's persuasive, but she didn't convince me of anything I didn't already want to do." She touched his arm. "It's time I stopped hiding, Samuel. I can't let shame define me forever." The pride in his eyes made her stand a little straighter. "You're the bravest woman I know, Lillian Abbott." "Not brave," she corrected. "Just tired of being afraid." He kissed her then, a quick, firm press of lips that held the promise of more. "I'll see you at Christmas, if not before." As the trio rode away, Lillian felt a curious lightness in her chest. The prospect of facing town still frightened her, but for the first time, the future seemed to hold more promise than dread. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Using the fabric Margaret had brought, Lillian sewed new curtains for the front windows and began work on a dress for the Christmas gathering. Samuel visited twice, bringing more supplies and staying for hours, their conversations now interspersed with gentle touches and kisses that grew increasingly passionate. During his second visit, as they sat before the fire, Samuel broached a subject they'd both been circling. "Lillian," he began, unusually hesitant, "I've been thinking about the future, about us." Her heart quickened. "What about us? I know it's early. We've only just begun this courtship, but I want you to know my intentions are serious." He took her hands in his. "I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after such a short time." "I care for you too," she said softly. "The thing is—" Samuel took a deep breath. "Running 2 separate homesteads is difficult, especially through winter. I've been thinking it might make sense to combine our efforts." Lillian stared at him. "Are you asking me to marry you, Samuel Quinn?" "Not yet," he said quickly. "That would be too soon for both of us. but I am asking if you'd consider it someday, if you'd consider combining our lives, our lands, building something together." The practical, straightforward way he put it, not cloaking the proposal in flowery sentiments, but presenting it as a partnership, a joining of forces against the hardships of frontier life, touched Lillian deeply. "I would consider it," she said. "More than consider it." "I think I'd like that very much, Samuel." The relief on his face was palpable. "I was afraid you'd think I was being too forward." "We're on the frontier," Lillian reminded him with a small smile. "Forward is the only direction worth moving." The morning of the Christmas gathering dawned clear and cold. Lillian rose early, heating water for a proper bath, then spending extra time with her hair. The dress she'd sewn from Margaret's fabric was a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair and brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. As she fastened the last button, Lillian heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leapt, knowing it would be Samuel. But when she opened the door, she found not just Samuel but a proper buggy, polished and fitted with runners for the snow. "Where did you get this?" she asked, astonished. "Borrowed it from the Holbrooks," Samuel replied. He was dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt under a black wool coat, his boots polished, his dark hair neatly combed. "Thought you deserved to arrive in town in style, not perched behind me on a horse." The thoughtfulness of the gesture nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Samuel." He helped her into the buggy, tucking a warm buffalo robe around her legs before climbing up beside her. As they set off toward Evanston, Lillian's anxiety returned, a fluttering in her stomach that grew stronger with each mile. Samuel seemed to sense her nervousness. "We don't have to stay long," he assured her. "Just an appearance at the gathering, then we can leave whenever you wish." Lillian squared her shoulders. "No, I'm done with hiding. These people will be my neighbors for years to come. Better to face them now with my head high." Samuel's hand closed over hers. "That's my Lillian. My Lillian." The simple possessive warmed her from the inside out, giving her courage as the outskirts of Evanston came into view. The town was small but growing, with a main street of wooden buildings, some now boasting proper glass windows and painted signs. Christmas decorations brightened doorways and windows, pine boughs, red ribbons, paper stars. Despite her anxiety, Lillian felt a pang of longing for community, for the bustle and life of town that she'd denied herself these past months. People turned to look as Samuel drove the buggy down the main street. Lillian felt their stares like physical touches, but she kept her chin up, her back straight. Beside her, Samuel radiated quiet pride. The Holbrooks' home was at the far end of town, a comfortable two-story house with light spilling from every window. When Samuel helped Lillian down from the buggy, he kept her hand in his, a public declaration that wasn't lost on the people watching from porches and storefronts. "Ready?" he asked softly. Lillian nodded, and together they walked up the path to the Holbrooks' door. Inside, the house was warm and fragrant with the scents of pine, cinnamon, and roasting meat. Perhaps 20 people filled the large front room, their conversations creating a pleasant hum that momentarily faltered when Lillian and Samuel entered. Then Margaret Holbrook bustled forward, arms outstretched. "Lillian, Samuel, you're just in time. Come in, come in. Everyone's been so looking forward to meeting you properly." And just like that, the moment of awkwardness passed. People resumed their conversations, though Lillian noticed curious glances cast their way. Margaret led them around the room, making introductions: the doctor and his wife, the blacksmith, the school teacher, the young couple who ran the boarding house where Sarah Wilson lived. Some faces were familiar from Lillian's infrequent trips to town before her father's death. Others were new to her. All were polite, though Lillian detected varying degrees of genuine warmth behind their greetings. "Don't mind, Mrs. Barnett," Margaret whispered after one particularly chilly introduction. "Her husband's had his eye on your property for years. She's just sour that you're still holding on to it." The frankness made Lillian smile despite her nervousness. Throughout the evening, she remained aware of Samuel beside her, his solid presence a comfort as she navigated this re-entry into society. His hand occasionally found the small of her back, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. To her surprise, Lillian found herself enjoying the gathering. The food was plentiful and delicious, the conversation interesting after months of isolation. She even received a few sincere apologies for her loss, delivered without the pity she dreaded. "Your father was a decent card player," old Mr. Henderson told her, his rheumy eyes kind. "Better than most. Just had a streak of bad luck that last night." "Did you know him well?" Lillian asked. "Well enough to call him friend. We played together twice a month for years." Henderson sipped his cider. "He spoke of you often, Miss Abbott. Proud as a peacock, he was, of his educated daughter." The simple words were a balm to wounds Lillian hadn't realized were still so raw. Her father had been proud of her. Whatever his flaws, that truth remained. As the evening progressed, Lillian noticed Samuel in conversation with Mr. Holbrook, their heads bent together in what appeared to be serious discussion. When Samuel rejoined her, there was a new purpose in his expression. What was that about? She asked as they accepted cups of hot mulled cider. "Business," Samuel said. "Mr. Holbrook's offered me a partnership in the mercantile." Lillian's eyes widened. "Samuel, that's wonderful. It would mean more time in town, less with the horses." He looked at her intently. "But it would also mean a steadier income. Security for a future, for a family someday." The implication wasn't lost on Lillian. Her cheeks warmed, but she met his gaze steadily. "Are you planning for our future, Mr. Quinn?" "If you'll allow it, Miss Abbott," he replied, his voice low and intimate despite the crowded room. Before she could respond, Margaret called everyone's attention for the evening's entertainment carols around the piano, followed by storytelling and small gift exchanges. Lillian and Samuel joined the circle, their shoulders touching as they sang familiar hymns and Christmas songs. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Samuel led Lillian to a quiet corner of the Holbrooks' front porch. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a velvet sky. "I have something for you," Samuel said, reaching into his coat pocket. "It's not much, but—" He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with the same blue ribbon he'd brought her months ago. Inside, Lillian found a silver locket on a delicate chain. "Open it," Samuel urged softly. The locket contained a tiny photograph of her father, younger than she remembered him, but unmistakably Thomas Abbott, his eyes crinkling at the corners in his familiar smile. "How did you—" Lillian breathed, her vision blurring with tears. "Mr. Henderson had it. From a group photograph taken years ago, he helped me cut it down to fit the locket." Samuel's eyes were anxious. "I thought you might want something to remember him by, the good parts of him." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. Without caring who might see, Lillian threw her arms around Samuel's neck and kissed him with all the emotion welling in her heart. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "It's perfect." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Merry Christmas, Lillian." The drive back to her homestead was quiet, both of them wrapped in their thoughts and the shared warmth beneath the buffalo robe. When they arrived, Samuel helped her down from the buggy, but didn't immediately release her hands. "I should go in," Lillian said, though she made no move to do so. "You should," Samuel agreed, equally stationary. Their eyes held in the moonlight, and Lillian felt a decision crystallizing within her, a certainty that had been building since that first snowbound kiss. "Or," she said carefully, "you could stay." Samuel's breath caught. "Lillian, are you sure?" "Your reputation, my reputation, is my own to risk," she interrupted. "And I'm not suggesting anything improper, just don't leave tonight, stay with me, talk with me, hold me." The naked longing on Samuel's face told her everything she needed to know. Without another word, he secured the horse and followed her inside. The cabin was cold after their absence, and they worked together to rekindle the fire, the domestic task feeling natural, right. When flames finally licked at the logs, they sat before the hearth, Lillian nestled against Samuel's chest, his arms around her. "I'm proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "You faced your fears today, walked into that gathering with your head high." "It was easier with you beside me," she admitted. "I'll always be beside you if you'll have me." Lillian twisted to look up at him. "Is that a proposal, Samuel Quinn?" In answer, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in the firelight, a ring, simple but beautiful, a small pearl set in silver. "I had planned to wait," he said, "to court you properly for months, to give you time to be certain. But life on the frontier has taught me that time isn't guaranteed to any of us." He took her hand. "I love you, Lillian Abbott. I think I began loving you that first day when you stood in your doorway with a shotgun, too proud to admit you needed help. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination to face each day no matter how hard. I want to build a life with you, whether here on your homestead, on mine, or somewhere new altogether." Tears filled Lillian's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too, Samuel. You saw me at my worst, ashamed, hiding, broken, and still you came back. You brought me not just what I needed to survive, but what I needed to live again. Hope, connection, purpose." "Is that a yes?" Samuel asked, a smile breaking across his face. "Yes," Lillian said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Quinn." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. They talked long into the night, making plans, sharing dreams, exchanging sweet kisses that occasionally deepened into something more urgent before Samuel reluctantly pulled back. "When we marry," he promised, his voice rough with restraint, "I want to do everything properly. Give you a real wedding, a proper start." Lillian smiled at his old-fashioned gallantry. "How soon can we marry?" "As soon as you wish. Spring, perhaps, when the passes are clear and travel is easier. Your mother's family in Cheyenne might want to attend." The thought of her mother's sister, whom she hadn't seen in years, brought a new dimension to Lillian's happiness. "Yes, spring would be perfect. And Samuel, I think I'm ready to go to town regularly now, to be part of the community again." "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Today showed me that hiding only gives power to shame. Most people were kind. Those who weren't, well, their opinion matters less than I feared." Samuel kissed her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know, Lillian Abbott. Soon to be Lillian Quinn," she reminded him with a smile. They fell asleep before the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, the promise of their future keeping them warmer than the flames. Spring came to Wyoming Territory in fits, and starts warm days followed by late snowfalls. Muddy roads that froze overnight only to thaw again by noon. Through it all, Lillian and Samuel's courtship deepened. He visited her homestead 3 times a week now, often staying for dinner, always leaving before full dark out of respect for propriety, though the temptation to stay grew stronger with each visit. In town, their engagement was the subject of much discussion, most of it positive. Lillian had become a regular sight in Evanston, riding in once a week for supplies and gradually rebuilding connections with neighbors. She helped at the mercantile occasionally, learning the business from Margaret Holbrook as Samuel took on more responsibilities as junior partner. As April turned to May and wildflowers began dotting the plains, wedding preparations accelerated. Lillian's aunt and cousins arrived from Cheyenne, bringing fabric for a proper wedding dress and stories of her mother that made Lillian laugh and cry in equal measure. She would have adored Samuel, Aunt Alina declared after meeting him. She always said you needed a man with both backbone and tenderness. He seems to have both in abundance. The wedding was set for the third Saturday in May, to be held in the small church in Evanston with a celebration afterward at the Holbrooks' home. The entire town seemed involved in preparations, women contributing dishes for the feast, men constructing additional tables and benches, children gathering wildflowers for decorations. The night before the wedding, Lillian stood on the porch of her homestead, soon to be their homestead, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel had ridden to town for his last night as a bachelor, though he'd seemed more reluctant than eager to leave her side. "It's tradition," Margaret had insisted, practically shooing him onto his horse. "The groom can't see the bride before the wedding. Brings bad luck." Now, alone in the gathering dusk, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 7 months ago, she'd received a telegram that shattered her world. She'd been broken, isolated, too ashamed to even go to town for the supplies she desperately needed. And then Samuel had come, bringing not just flour and coffee and ammunition, but kindness, understanding, and eventually, love. He'd seen past her shame and grief to the woman beneath, strong enough to survive, brave enough to begin again. Tomorrow, she would become Lillian Quinn. They would combine their resources, working both homesteads until they decided which offered the better prospects for their future. Samuel would continue his partnership at the mercantile, while Lillian had discovered a talent for bookkeeping that Mr. Holbrook was eager to utilize. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but it was a good life, honest, purposeful, built on mutual respect and deep affection. There would be hardships ahead. The frontier guaranteed as much. But they would face them together, stronger as a pair than either had been alone. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Lillian touched the locket at her throat, Samuel's Christmas gift, containing her father's image. Despite everything, she'd found a way to forgive Thomas Abbott, to remember the good along with the bad. It was Samuel who had shown her how, with his own story of a flawed father still worthy of love. "I'm getting married tomorrow, Papa," she whispered to the night air. "I think you would have liked him." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, the Wyoming spring offering its blessing in the form of gentle sunshine and a soft breeze that carried the scent of sage and new grass. Lillian's aunt and cousins arrived early, helping her dress in the simple but elegant gown they'd sewn together, ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, cut to flatter her slender figure. "You look beautiful," Aunt Alina declared, tears in her eyes as she fastened the pearl earrings that had been Lillian's mother's. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." Sarah Wilson, now a fixture in Lillian's life, carefully arranged wildflowers in Lillian's auburn hair. "Mr. Quinn is going to fall over when he sees you," the girl predicted with her usual frankness. The ride to town was a procession of sorts, Lillian in the Holbrooks' buggy with her aunt, followed by wagons carrying her cousins, Sarah, and neighbors who had become friends in recent months. As they approached Evanston, Lillian saw that the entire town had turned out for the occasion, the church steps crowded with well-wishers. And there, waiting at the church door, stood Samuel. He was dressed in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face solemn until he caught sight of Lillian. Then his expression transformed, joy and wonder replacing nervousness as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Lillian. She remembered the warmth of Samuel's hands holding hers, the sincerity in his voice as he recited his vows, the gentle way he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. Most of all, she remembered the look in his eyes, steady, certain, full of promise. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and the church erupted in cheers as Samuel kissed his bride with restrained passion that nevertheless hinted at deeper feelings to be expressed in private. The celebration at the Holbrooks' home lasted well into the evening, food and music and dancing, congratulations from every quarter, gifts both practical and sentimental presented with genuine goodwill. Even Mrs. Barnett, who had once looked at Lillian with such disdain, offered a grudging compliment on her dress and a hand-embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift. As the sun began to set, Samuel sought out his wife among the revelers. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. The title sent a thrill through Lillian. "Yes," she said simply. "Take me home." They slipped away amid good-natured teasing and ribald jokes that made Lillian blush despite her determination to remain composed. The buggy ride back to the homestead was charged with anticipation, Samuel's hand resting on hers beneath the light blanket covering their laps. When they arrived, Samuel surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, wife," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. The cabin had been transformed in their absence. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new quilts adorned the bed visible through the bedroom door, and flowers filled every available container. Margaret's work, Lillian suspected, or perhaps Sarah's. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "You're beautiful," Samuel countered, his eyes dark with desire as he stepped closer. "Lillian Quinn." The name sounded right, felt right. She was Lillian Quinn, now no longer defined by her father's mistakes or her own shame, but by the choices she had made, the love she had found, the future she was building. Samuel's hands cradled her face with reverence. "I've waited so long to be alone with you like this." "We're alone now," she whispered, reaching up to loosen his tie. That night, they discovered each other fully for the first time, awkward at moments, tender at others, eventually finding a rhythm that left them both breathless with pleasure and wonder. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Lillian felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. "I love you," Samuel murmured against her hair, "more than I have words to express." "Show me again," Lillian suggested with newfound boldness, and he did, their second joining even sweeter than the first. In the months that followed, Lillian and Samuel settled into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. They decided to make her homestead their primary residence, its water source and pasture superior to Samuel's, though they maintained both properties for the time being. Samuel continued his partnership at the mercantile, riding to town 3 days a week while working the land the other days. Lillian managed their home, kept the books for both their homestead and the mercantile, and began experimenting with cheese making, selling her products to neighbors and townspeople with increasing success. Their first real test as a couple came in late summer, when a prairie fire threatened their eastern pasture. They fought it together, alongside neighbors who rode from miles around to help, finally containing it before it reached the cabin or main barn. Soot-covered and exhausted, they held each other amid the scorched earth, grateful for what had been saved. "We make a good team, Mrs. Quinn," Samuel said, his voice hoarse from smoke but his eyes bright with the special light reserved only for her. "The best, Mr. Quinn," Lillian agreed, knowing it was true, As summer turned to fall, Lillian began to suspect a new blessing was on its way. Her monthly courses were late, her breasts tender, certain foods suddenly unappetizing. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, wanting to be certain before sharing the news with Samuel. One evening in October, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Lillian decided the time had come. "Samuel," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it, love?" "I believe," she placed their joined hands on her still flat stomach, "that we're going to have a baby." Samuel's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of heartbeats. "A baby," he whispered. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without consulting Dr. Miller. The baby should arrive in late spring, I think." Samuel pulled her into his arms, his joy so evident it brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "A child," he marveled. "Our child." That night, he made love to her with exquisite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious beyond measure. Afterward, he laid his hand protectively over her abdomen, wonder still evident in his expression. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed in the darkness. "After my parents, after wandering for so long, I never thought I'd find this, home, family." Lillian covered his hand with hers. "I never thought I'd find it either. Not after Papa died the way he did. I thought I'd be alone, ashamed, isolated forever. And now," she smiled in the darkness, "now I know that sometimes the things we're most ashamed of can lead us to the greatest joy. If I hadn't been too ashamed to go to town that day, you never would have come to my door. We never would have found each other." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "I would have found you somehow, Lillian Quinn. If not that way, then another. Some things are meant to be." As she drifted toward sleep in her husband's embrace, Lillian thought of how far she had come from that day she'd collapsed in the yard with her father's telegram. The shame that had once seemed unbearable had faded, replaced by pride in what she and Samuel were building together. She thought of the child growing within her, who would know only love and security, not the uncertainty she had faced. She thought of the community that had embraced her, once she found the courage to rejoin it. She thought of Samuel, who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. The frontier was still hard, still demanding, still capable of breaking those who weren't strong enough. But Lillian had discovered her own strength not in facing it alone, but in allowing herself to connect, to need, to love and be loved in return. As spring neared again, bringing with it the anniversary of when Samuel had first come to her door, Lillian's body had rounded with their growing child. The baby kicked vigorously now, especially when Samuel spoke, as if already recognizing the father's voice. "He'll be strong like his mother," Samuel predicted, his hand resting on Lillian's belly as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Or she'll be stubborn like her father," Lillian countered with a smile. "Either way, this child will be loved," Samuel said with certainty. "And we'll know that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the shame that had once imprisoned her had become the catalyst for her greatest happiness. Through Samuel's kindness, she had found not just the supplies she needed to survive, but the love she needed to truly live. And as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of promise, Lillian Quinn knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed, but standing proudly in the life she and Samuel had built together, ready to face whatever challenges the frontier might bring next. Their son, Thomas Samuel Quinn, was born on a clear May morning in 1879, almost exactly a year after their wedding. With his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes, he was the perfect blend of them both. As Lillian held him to her breast for the first time, Samuel beside her with tears in his eyes. She felt the circle of their story complete itself. From shame to joy, from isolation to connection, from fear to love, the journey had not been easy, but the destination was worth every painful step along the way. And as Samuel kissed her forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand, Lillian knew they were just beginning the most important journey of all, the one they would take together, as a family, into a future bright with possibility.